The master archivist slid a freshly bound volume into a bronze plaque and sealed it with a blank tag, while the archive answered with a low, architectural rumble. Suspicion tightened the investigator's throat as he watched the brass tag click into place. He did not speak. The lamp oil hissed. The investigator reached for his satchel, but kept his hand flat against the leather, because taking anything in that moment would be an overt act. The central problem lay visible in the seal: why this institution catalogued only failures, and for whose purpose those failures were kept under lock and ritual. The investigator had been in libraries before, but not like this. He wore layered robes with charcoal and deep burgundy trim, and carried a brass pocket compass that never left his palm. He was mid-40s, pale and slightly stooped from years bent over ledgers. He tapped his fingertips together once, a habit he used when forming theories. The investigator's mouth was dry. He made a note with his antique fountain pen on a small field notebook and kept his eyes on the master archivist's hands. Why preserve mistakes? The investigator, because they change how people try again. The master archivist, because some failures are dangerous if left to the world. His voice was dry, clipped by practice. He wore an embroidered shawl with sigils and a ceremonial keyring of blank tags at his hip. He slid one tag along the ring and let it brush the investigator's knuckles like a test. They moved down the bronze, lined easel together. Shelves rose like ribs, and the archive's alcoves glowed with faint phosphorescent amber. Every step made the stone stairs murmur. The master archivist's footsteps were slow, measured. The investigator walked faster, edging his shoulder against the cold wall. The archivist stopped at a narrow spiral stair and pointed the satchel aside. I will show you the ritual. The master archivist, you watch, you learn. Then you decide whether you can accept the cost. His jaw tightened. Do you understand? I do, the investigator answered. He felt suspicion settle into a working drive. He wanted proof, not a parable. He wanted to catalogue reasons. They descended into the lower stacks. The air grew colder. The master archivist lit a rusted lamp, and its filament threw hard lines across stone. Marginalia crept at the edges of ledgers, crossed out formulas, inked out diagrams, lists with single names circled and then erased. The investigator leaned forward and tilted his head to read a note scrawled in cramped script. The name aloud, Hale. He read. The master archivist's fingers slid along spines. Hale failed in year 7. He insisted the device would sing. It caught fire against his palm and burned his ledger. We removed the drawings. We kept the instructions. He paused. We always keep the instructions. The investigator's doubt shifted into attention. He copied a line with the pen. He read the sentence twice, then looked up. So the archive is a repository, he said, not of ruin, but of instruction. Both, the master archivist, instruction can be a weapon. Failure can teach a lesson to those who must not repeat it. He did not elaborate. He had calloused fingertips stained with ink, and he rubbed them on his coat. At a stone reading table, the investigator opened a ledger of experiments. The pages smelled of old oil and iron. There were diagrams with aborted protocols, annotations that crossed entire lines and replaced them with terse corrections. One diagram showed a mechanical arm and an equation. The next page had the arm sheared away and a note. Do not apply current without shielded binding. A line beneath that, in smaller hand, read, sabotage suspected. The investigator traced the ink with a finger. The archive shifted, shelves moving a hair's breadth as if listening. The investigator's curiosity amplified into a tentative fear. If sabotage was recorded among the failures, then these failures were not mere mistakes. He looked up at the master archivist, Sabotage, who sabotaged Hale's device. The master archivist's eyes narrowed. Sometimes those who seek quick advantage remove safety measures for speed. Sometimes they hide errors to avert scrutiny. Sometimes, he stopped, then added in a clipped voice, sometimes the institution decides to steer outcomes. Doubt opened a second channel in the investigator. The possibility that the archive had been active, adjusting which failures reached daylight and which were locked away. The investigator checked the brass compass instinctively and felt the needle jitter toward the stack of vault folios. They pushed deeper toward a vault approach lined with sealed folios. The master archivist halted at a cluster of iron-bound books. He tapped a heavy iron key against the door and laid a hand on a folio that was bound in hide. The vault's mouth exhaled a colder breath. "This one is not for casual eyes." The master archivist, and his voice lost its ritual cadence. He produced a single ceremonial key and held it out on his palm. "If you want at that folio, you must swear a constraint. You must accept I will bind you with tags if you attempt to disseminate what you read." The investigator put his hand over the archivist's and did not take the key. "I understand the conditions," he said. He wanted access, but not the immediate show of trust. He wanted to see the procedure from the outside first. His curiosity had shifted into a plan. They reached the open folio alcove beneath an arched recess. Under the lamp, a ledger lay open with tight diagrams and notes that had been methodically crossed out. In the margins, a small line of handwriting caught the investigator. He read it aloud without meaning to. "Do not follow the mentor's note. It leads to containment." He looked up. "This says my mentor's name." The master archivist's jaw tightened, and a thin scar along his brow flexed. "We keep traces. Names come with notes. We annotate motives. We keep what must be kept." He sounded tired. The investigator rifled the pages and found an index entry with his own handwriting. The letters were slanted in a way he recognized. He had written this line years ago during a seminar, and now the same hand annotated a failed doctrine that was attributed to his mentor. The discovery recalibrated everything: his past research, the mentor he had trusted, and the purpose of the archive. "How is my hand here?" he demanded. "Records collect echoes." The master archivist. He moved his hand along the spines, and the archive answered with a faint hum. "Sometimes marginalia arrive from visitors. Sometimes they are transcriptions of speeches. Sometimes they are amendments." He did not deny the possibility that the investigator's handwriting was present because the investigator had been involved. Instead, he let the ambiguity stand and watched the investigator's expression change. A private knot of fear formed in the investigator. It was a fear with teeth. Fear for reputation, fear for the mentor's safety, fear that his own notes had been used as evidence. He balled and unballed his hand around the fountain pen. "We need to open the sealed folio." The investigator. "If my handwriting is here, I must know why." "You would break the seal." The master archivist. The archivist's voice became a thin wire of command. "You would force the vault open." They argued in quick lines as they approached the vault chamber. The exchange tightened into a rapid back and forth. "Master archivist, answer me." The investigator's voice was flat. "Did you place my hand in this ledger?" "I did not," the master archivist replied. "I do not place hands. I preserve what arrives." "Then who did?" The investigator demanded. "The archive folds what is given." The archivist. "You will not like the answer." "Then tell me now." The investigator. "I will not." The master archivist, not without the ritual, his fingers tightened on the keyring. The rapid exchange stopped when the investigator made a motion. He reached for the sealed folio. The master archivist lunged to stop him. "Done T," the archivist began. The investigator forced his hand under the archivist's and pried the folio's binding open. A cold, pale light spilled from the pages like the breath of a deep winter. The stacks groaned and chains rattled. The archive emitted a low, resonant hum that felt like a body shifting its weight. For 3 heartbeats, nobody spoke. The cold light spilled across diagrams, and the investigator read aloud, voice trembling, "Procedure to weaponize error. Preserve false negatives, circulate corrective annotations, allow select failures to stand as warnings, while leaving other routes open for exploitation." He swallowed. "They used failures to change choices." The master archivist grabbed the folio and slammed it closed. "You cannot unsee that," he said. "You must accept the binding. Bind me if you must." The investigator. He did not resist when the master archivist produced ceremonial tags and wound them around his wrists. The tags clicked and took the investigator's pen from his hand. He felt the metal bite his skin in a way that translated to shame. "You broke the restraint." The master archivist, breathless. "You forced a folio that we keep for a reason. We do not show this because disclosure becomes contagion. We contain so the world does not weaponize what fails." His voice tore between authority and regret. Containment is also weaponizing the investigator. You shaped outcomes by who you allowed to learn. A short confrontation ensued. It had 5 quick exchanges. You risk lives with exposure. The archivist, you risk truth with concealment. The investigator answered, you cannot be trusted with it. The archivist, you cannot be trusted to decide unilaterally. The investigator, then what would you have me do? The archivist, the words clipped. The investigator says, jaw set. He watched the master archivist's hands as the archivist absently slid fingers along the spines, and the archive emitted a low rumble. The investigator shifted again. Suspicion to curiosity to decision. He recognized the pattern of their disagreement, but also felt a new, hard clarity about his own role. He would not let the master archivist keep the final say. Given a grudging compromise, the master archivist allowed limited documentation under oath. He handed a single ceremonial key under strict conditions and permitted the investigator to copy one marginal page. The investigator kept his hands steady. He chose a single small leaf of paper with a cramped note and slid it into his satchel between pages of an innocuous ledger. The motion was quick and precise. He had made a defiant private choice. At this moment, an external event shifted the scene. A new ledger was added to a bronze plaque across the corridor with a hollow clack that the archive registered like a pulse. The master archivist stopped and listened. Then he turned, eyes narrowed. They will notice additions, he said. The archive marks arrivals. You stole a page, investigator. You know what that means? He stepped close enough that the investigator could smell tobacco smoke and cedar. I know what it means, the investigator. But I also know what silence means for the people whose work was altered or erased. I cannot accept total custody by one office. He felt resolve bloom into a fierce steadiness. They spoke in lower voices as dawn crept along stone. The master archivist bound the investigator's wrists with tags to demonstrate the institution's protocols for containment when disclosure occurred. The investigator did not resist. He let them bind him because resistance would bring harsher measures. He kept his eyes on the archive and the new bronze plaque that read nothing but a burn mark where a title had been. On the way to the exit, the investigator paused beneath an arched recess and read the stolen marginal note again. The sentence was short and dangerous. It documented a deliberate adjustment of test parameters to fail certain trials. The note included a name and a date tied to a Mentor's experiment that had been labeled incompetent in public records. The twist changed how the investigator understood betrayals. Not a rival's petty sabotage, but an institutional choreography where failure was curated to steer disciplines and careers. A mid-chapter cliffhanger rose when the archive gave a low, new rumble and the shelves shifted as if closing ranks. The master archivist's shoulders twitched. He moved to an iron-bound folio at the vault threshold and placed a palm on its cover. We are watched even here, he said. By whom? The investigator, by the archive, and by committees that prefer certain failures to remain failures. By men who mark outcomes to control futures. He would say no more. The clue remained hanging, specific and unresolved. They reached the corridor by the stacks. The investigator slipped the marginal page into his satchel under the worn leather flap. He felt the weight of the paper between his fingers, thin and unassuming. The master archivist watched him with an expression that mixed suspicion and a trace of something closer to pity. If you walk with that page beyond the steps. The master archivist, you will be bound differently in other places. You will not sit at our table. You will be pursued by committees who think they own failed knowledge. His voice was lower than before. Then I will adapt. The investigator. He tapped his fingertips together once and kept his mouth set. He had moved through suspicion, doubt, and fear into a definite choice. Dawn brushed the library stone steps as the investigator departed. The archive settled into a low silence. A new bronze plaque appeared on the far easel with a blank title and a faint burn along its edge, ash drifting in a narrow breath of air. The investigator stepped into the stony light and felt the binding tags at his wrists. He had the stolen page in his satchel and a ledger of institutional practices on his conscience. He stopped at the threshold, looked back, and saw the master archivist slide a sealed folio into a plaque and let the blank tag click. The archivist's motion was ceremonious. He glanced at the investigator without speaking. Their conversation had not resolved whether the archive's containment protected or controlled. It had resolved instead a smaller truth. The investigator had moved a fragment out of the labyrinth and into his possession. The final paragraph ties to a concrete action. The investigator pushed the wooden door open and stepped into the dawn. He closed the door behind him. The brass handle made a distinct, final click that the archive below registered with a single, distant echo. He pried the bronze seal from the alcove with both hands. Suspicion tightened his jaw as the metal resisted, and then gave, the click sounding too small in the vaulted dark. A cracked leather folio lay wedged in the shelf, its sigil rubbed thin and a recent smear of ink along the gutter. The investigator froze, counting breaths. The central problem was immediate and concrete. Who had written in the archive within the night? And why did the handwriting match a protocol he had only ever sealed himself? He reached for the folio and the shelves answered with a low scrape, as if the building remembered him. He kept his movements minimal. He was mid-40s, pale and slender, sleeves rolled over layered robes, a brass compass balanced at his hip. He had come that night because the master archivist had, only days earlier, closed a freshly bound volume into a bronze plaque and sealed it with a blank tag. The investigator had watched the brass tag click into place and had not spoken then. That image, the archivist sliding the book, and the plaque seating the volume, stilled him now. He moved a thumb over the folio's spine to test the binding. Suspicion directed his hands. He would not allow ritual deference to replace inquiry. He eased the folio onto the stone table beneath a rusted lamp. The lamp's wick hissed when he bent it nearer. He smelled old oil and paper. His fingers found marginal annotations in a fresh, dark script. He recognized the stroke. A small loop at the start of the letter that he himself made during long nights of cataloguing. He pulled back. A secondary conflict arrived then, abrupt. Was this evidence of illicit access or a deliberate provocation? He felt a cold tightening at the base of his skull, concrete, physical, and shifted toward action. A soft footfall came from the ante-room. The master archivist's silhouette filled the doorway. His hair was iron white and his shawl hung heavy with embroidered sigils. The investigator, the archivist. He kept his voice short and dry. You should not be here. The investigator did not lower the folio. He held the folio with an even hand and answered in measured tones, Master Archivist, this folio bears new marginalia. The handwriting, he indicated the note. Do not touch the notes. The archivist interrupted. Do not read them outside ritual. He moved into the chamber and set his heavy iron key on the table. The investigator watched him slide the key under a thumb and tap it against the folio as if testing whether sound could reveal ink. The tension rose. Their goals collided. The investigator wanted to know who had written and why. The archivist wanted containment. Why would the archive write in the night? The investigator. His voice kept evenness, but his hands had begun to tap the folio's edge, an outward sign of agitation. The archive adds new failures. But it does not write with hands it has not borne witness to. The archivist's eyes narrowed. He touched his shawl's embroidered sigils and then, slower, reached to the book without asking. You watched me seal a volume yesterday, he said, restraint. You watched the plaque seat the bound book and heard the bronze click. The investigator nodded. That earlier event was recorded in the vault's rhythm for him. He could recite the hiss of lamp oil, the weight of the book, the archivist's clipped syllables. The archivist placed the folio on the table and designed a ritual boundary with a strip of aged vellum. If you must read, it will be under sanction, he said. If you cross that line, you accept the archive's law. The investigator considered the offer. He wanted the marginalia. He wanted to test whether failure was being curated to instruct or to punish. He set his jaw and agreed to supervision. The first emotion shift arrived, suspicion to guarded resolve. He would take nothing clandestine that he would observe. They moved to the stone reading chamber. The room was circular, capped by a low dome. A domed lamp cast a hard pool of light over the table. Beyond it, stacks dissolved into shadow. The archive, in its architectural way, shifted. A stairway creaked and shelves registered a faint mechanical rustle. The investigator placed the folio open, where the lamp's circle struck the vellum. He leaned forward and read. Diagrams of aborted rituals, schematics crossed out in care, notation of required materials removed with a single vertical stroke. Each cancelled item was precise, a specific herb, the number of candles, the angle of a sigil. The notes were not violent erasures. They were surgical. The folio organizes attempts that did not reach proof. The archivist, those attempts teach the archive what should not be repeated. He spoke like a guardian defending a wall, not an ideologue defending an idea. The investigator read a crossed diagram labeled with a date, a failed binding attempt that, on paper, had set a pupil's palm aflame. He touched that line and felt a prick on his skin where the heat should have occurred. The second emotion shift moved him from guarded resolve to physical alarm. He found he had to step back and breathe. Why is there a note in your hand? The archivist sharply, why do I see your loop in the A? The investigator froze. His throat worked. He had no conscious memory of filing such an annotation. He leafed back and found a protocol, dated 3 weeks prior, with marginal instructions in his own looping hand. A sequence of sigil placements and pauses that ended with a struck notation. No result. Reattempt. He could feel sweat gather at his temple. He touched the letters again. The ink was dry. The archivist's voice tightened. Sometimes failures are active. They are not merely records. They linger. The archive chooses which lingering harms to contain. The investigator pushed his spectacles up and spoke quickly. Master Archivist, you sealed a bound volume yesterday. I watched. That plaque contained a different ledger. Who had access to this folio after sunset? The archivist answered with a clipped list of names. Himself, the investigator, and the vault's knight holder, a man named Leto. The investigator had never met Leto. The archivist pronounced Leto's shifts of duty and added that the archive's stairways moved overnight to limit corridors. The argument took shape as a set of rapid exchanges. The investigator, the archivist, these are not matters for unvetted curiosity. The investigator removed a small field notebook and set it near the folio. He tapped the page and then said, Master Archivist, I will not be unvetted. But you know me. You know I catalogue failures. Either Leto touched this folio, or someone left my hand imitated, which is it. The archivist looked away and then back. The next external event arrived. The lamp oil hissed and guttered. A thin wisp of smoke rose. The archive answered with a low, architectural rumble. They agreed on controlled perusal. The archivist produced a ceremonial keyring of blank tags and a bone tally stick. He set a protocol. The investigator would read aloud while the archivist watched. The investigator objected to speaking the contents, but the archivist insisted that vocalization placed the contained item into the archive as jurisdiction. They began. The investigator read a marginal note aloud. Failed binding. Third attempt. Pattern broke at alignment 3. He pronounced each word. When he said alignment 3, the floor beneath the table vibrated. The archive rearranged a stair by a half pace. The investigator stopped. The archivist's hands found the folio's corners and steadied them. Stop. The archivist, say only what is necessary. The investigator swallowed and continued, measured. His speech became a lever. The archive reacted to the sound of his voice. They reached a sequence that recorded an aborted ritual the investigator remembered by concrete detail. He had stood in a laboratory wing for an experiment that used the same alignment, and the participant's knuckle had been marked with a crescent of cauterized skin. He felt the scar along his own left brow, thin and familiar, pressed like an accusation. A new, unwelcome recognition arrived then. The marginal note contained a notation in his hand and a date that matched the day he had been absent during an unrecorded corridor shift. He had an empty slot in his memory, an hour between cataloguing and the meal bell. He had no clear recollection of the corridor slight then. He touched the date and looked up. You recognize that day, the archivist. You know the experiment you ran. The investigator's voice was low. I remember preparing the instruments. I remember the lamp snapping. I do not remember finishing. He could not call the gap a memory. He only had events. The lamp, the instruments, the later scar. The folios marginalia supplied a concrete missing step. Investigator misplaced pause, participant harmed, protocol struck. The investigator read that line aloud and felt a rush of nausea. He found his mouth tasting of metal. He tried to copy the pages with a thin lead stylus. He set the stylus and then the archive responded. Shelves shifted and a catalogued chain tumbled. A heavy bronze plaque snapped closed somewhere in the stacks. The investigator moved to lift the stylus, and the archivist lunged to restrain him. They collided, voices flared, rapid back, and fourth lines followed, stop. The archivist barked, "You will not remove the folio. Master Archivist, I need a copy." The investigator, "The record must be verified." "The archive does not permit removal of active failure." "Then allow me ink and a witness." "No, Master Archivist, enough." The archivist's hand closed on the stylus. He forced the investigator's fingers away and hauled the stylus out of reach. The archive stacks moved again, corralling the chamber. That external event forced a small cliffhanger. Would the investigator be restrained, or would he take the folio outright? The investigator made a sudden choice. He pushed his palm flat on the open page and broke the folio's seal with a shallow, quick motion. The folio's pages flared with a cold, pale light, precise and immediate. He felt the light like pressure against his temples, and then specific recollections, exact scenes, arrived uninvited and whole. The morning he had adjusted an alignment and the apprentice's hand recoiled. The exact placement of an herb that, when burnt, produced a low ringing in a subject's teeth. The timbre of a bell he had heard that night, and the angle of his own hesitation. These were not hazy impressions. They were concrete events. The apprentice's name, Marek, the count of 3 breaths, the precise note of the bell. He saw Marek's fingers blister and smelled the copper tang when he had tried to stop the sequence. He felt the physical shock of the moment again. He gasped. The archivist moved to clamp the folio. "No." The archivist, voice breaking from a place of duty. "No. You did not consent to this." The investigator's hands shook. He could not say whether the recollections were memory or the folio translating a past into his present. He could only state what he experienced. His hands had placed instruments. His thumb had brushed a sigil. Marek had cried out at the third pause. He remembered himself stepping back and a faint smear of burned cloth on his sleeve. The archivist forced the folio closed and slid a blank tag into the plaque. The tag clicked. The archive released a single low hum. The folio's light went out. The investigator doubled over a stone table and pressed his palms to his eyes to stop the looping images from overlaying one another. The archivist spoke slowly, each word a measured weight. "Containment is not punishment alone," he said. "It is a choice to keep harm where it cannot infect more hands." The investigator inverted the statement into a question. Was Marek's harm deliberate? Did I set the sequence to fail? The archivist did not answer immediately. He thumbed a tally stick and then met the investigator's eyes. "No. You did not intend harm. The folio shows patterns of error. It also shows pattern makers, those who engineered failure into trials. There is a difference." The archive resists both. The investigator felt confusion compress his chest into an actionable clarity. He had participated in a protocol that failed. Someone had recorded the failure in his hand. A third party might have engineered the failure to appear as his error. The archivist resealed the folio with a blank tag and replaced it into the plaque. He performed the motion with ritual slowness, sliding the key onto the ring and placing it so the tag set flush. The archive, on cue, emitted a low rumble as metal met metal. The investigator's entire body hummed with afterimages, sound of the bell. Marek's fingernails split from heat. The iron tang. He put a hand to his left brow where the thin scar ran and found the skin taut. The archivist's hands were steady. "You must accept that some failures are contained because they change people who study them." The archivist. The investigator did not accept passively. He placed a small field note, his own pen's scrawl, and a blank tag near the plaque. He did not speak. He slid the tag into the plaque's slot with both hands. The metal accepted it. He wrote a single line on the note. A list of names he wanted to question. Leto, Marek, the knight holder who had changed shifts 3 weeks earlier. The archivist looked at the note and said nothing. The investigator left the field notebook and walked out into the pre-dawn corridor. Outside the vault, the corridor light was cold and precise. The air smelled of oil and cedar. At the threshold, the investigator paused, counting evidence. He had read the folio. He had received a set of concrete recollections that matched a day he had not remembered. He had confronted the archivist and been restrained. He had placed a blank tag into the plaque. He had left with a list of names. The last external event occurred when a distant heavy door thudded twice, a sound that suggested someone else had sealed a chamber elsewhere. He turned that way once and then continued down the corridor. He walked with a new purpose that was not rhetorical. His legs moved at a purposeful pace. He felt the archives hum in his bones. He felt implicated in an act he had not intended. He had a packet of tasks. To find Leto, to question Marek, to map the night, holders shift changes, to compare the handwritten loop in other ledgers. He also had a question that now loomed as an operational challenge. Who had the motive to plant his handwriting? The twist in the chapter came into focus. The folios marginalia suggested not only that failures were curated but that the archive, or someone using the archive forms, could rewrite agency by assigning blame. He paused beneath a rusted lamp and pulled his brass compass from his satchel. The compass needle wavered, then settled. He pricked the edge of his thumb on a seam of leather and tasted iron. He folded the list and placed it inside his satchel alongside the fountain pen that bore a faint ink smudge near the right ear of his shirt. That smudge matched an ink blot in the folio. He touched the blot and thought of the archivist's face when he had sealed the volume the day before. He remembered the quiet click and the way the archivist's fingers had brushed a bronze plaque. When he reached the ante-room door, the archivist called once, his voice not loud but carrying the authority of custody. Investigator. The investigator turned. The archivist held a small bone tally stick between two fingers. You will not tell Marek yet. The archivist. Not until you have Leto and the night logs. The investigator nodded. He had meant to question others immediately. The archivist's interdiction reshaped his plan into steps that involved other people's choices. He agreed. The second emotion shift concluded into resigned determination. From alarm to action, he stepped into the pre-dawn corridor. Dust motes turned in the thin light. He felt watched. He kept his stride measured, the satchel a familiar weight against his hip. The archives hum diminished behind him, but its mechanical memory persisted in his ears. He had been warned, and he had resisted. He had been shown himself in the folio, and had learned that the archive could attribute failure with precision. He had placed his blank tag and left a note. Those concrete acts bound him to the collection as its new witness and its new suspect. At the corridor's far end, a heavy door clanged. He stopped and watched it close. Then he resumed walking, the list of names safe in his satchel, the lamp's smell clinging to his sleeves, and the taste of iron on his tongue. He had a next step: find Leto's roster and trace the night holders' access. He also had the deeper administrative duty of cataloging why the archive would choose to make his handwriting speak. He did not believe in metaphors for this compulsion. He believed in steps, in interviews, in tally sticks and ledger comparisons. He believed in the slow work of evidence. He reached the stairwell and descended to the wing where Leto might be found. The corridor light narrowed into the pages of his memory. He had a final, precise act before he left. He sealed the field note in the satchel, checked the brass compass, and tightened the leather strap on his satchel. The last line of the chapter is not reflection but motion. He moved toward Leto's posted hours, toward a room where another person would offer answers or concealments. The plaque behind him contained a folio that had made an accusation and offered a memory. The corridor ahead contained people who could either confirm that accusation or refute it. He descended the stairs into the wing, and the heavy door clanged closed behind him. The investigator's fingers closed on cold bronze while the master archivist guided the sealed folio into a low, oaken cradle. Suspicion tightened the investigator's throat, and he did not speak. The lamp oil hissed. A thin trail of smoke curled toward a stone lintel. He had not expected to find the archivist working at this hour. He had expected only the hush of stacks and the archive's distant hum. He gripped the satchel strap with his free hand, feeling the brass compass press into his palm. The immediate problem was clear. Why move this folio now, and who would control whatever it contained? He stepped forward without knocking. The investigator's coat brushed the lectern as he reached the circle of light. "Master Archivist," he said low and even, "why is the folio out of its alcove?" The archivist's fingers paused on the ribbon. He did not look up at once. Context arrived in fragments without exposition. The archive had answered with a low rumble when the master archivist sealed a volume in the bronze plaque 2 nights earlier, a sound the investigator still remembered. And the investigator himself had pried a bronze seal from an alcove once before, digging the metal with his palm until it yielded. Those earlier acts had left a mark, a smear of ink along a gutter, a whispered warning from the stacks, and they shaped how he moved now. He did not introduce himself. He only stood in the light, measuring distance and timing. "You should not be here, the master archivist." He slid a blank bronze tag from a ring of pale metal and set it on the lectern between them. His voice carried the rasp of someone who had used words like tools for decades. The tag gleamed. "You know what that means." "Leave it." Suspicion shifted into impatience. The investigator answered with a step closer and a flat hand on the folio's cover. "Master Archivist, you sealed this 2 nights ago," the archive answered then. I watched the plaque click into place. "Why move it now without record?" He pushed the cover with a thumb. The seal resisted. The archivist kept his hand at the folio's edge. "Because the folio remembers differently now," he said, "because a reader marked it. We cannot let a marked folio circulate without rebinding." His fingers brushed the compass on the investigator's satchel, not touching, only noting. "You know what marks do here?" Doubt moved into anger for a beat. The investigator: "I pried the seal once. I know what it does. You placed that volume in the bronze cradle yourself 2 nights ago. Why are you moving the hazard at midnight?" His words were clipped. Each one aimed to force information, not to provoke drama. The archivist's jaw tightened. He lifted the folio, slow and careful, and rested it in the cradle. "I am not moving a hazard. I am closing a wound." He tapped the bronze tag with a fingernail and then slid it under the folio's ribbon. "You bear a fresh ink smear under your ear. You were marked when you read the folio earlier." The investigator touched the faint ink near his collarbone, where a smear had stained his sleeve. He had felt it 2 chapters ago when he pried the seal. Suspicion had urged him then and had driven him back. Now the smear thinned under the lamp, but it had not gone. The emotion shifted again, suspicion to urgency, because the archivist's words reframed the stakes. Markings could be bound away or released. The investigator's throat closed. "Show me," he said. The master archivist did not hesitate this time. He snapped the folio's ribbon and eased the cover. The folio smelled of oil and vellum. The investigator caught the metallic tang of old ink. The pages were dense with diagrams crossed out in charcoal and reworked with ink, marginal numbers, and a small hand-drawn sequence that repeated like an experiment log. The archivist placed a worn leather finger at a page corner and held it there as if restraining a small animal. The folio's marginalia moved under the investigator's gaze. A diagram of a glass retort with tiny hash marks, a notation of pressure readings, a crossed-out attempt to distill something that read like a name. The investigator leaned in. The lamp reflected in the ink. "This is a failed attempt at sympathetic binding." The archivist: "It ruptured the reference and left a mark. When a reader sees the page, the failure imprints on them. We bind those marks." A memory rose, concrete, not vague. The morning a lab assistant spilled an acidic solvent across a ledger in a subordinate school, the smell of vinegar and scorched paper, children coughing as a door banged open. The folio's marginal picture replayed that scene in clear sensory detail for the investigator. The retort shivered, a cork popped, a fine white powder spilling like salt across a table. That image slid into the room as a precise replay of sound and smell. The investigator's breath hitched. His hands tightened on the lectern. Before he could speak, the archive answered. Shelves shifted a fraction, like a throat clearing. A faint phosphorescent light trembled in an alcove several rows away. The archivist's hand went to the folio's gutter to clamp it shut. "Close it," he said. "Do not read further." He read. The page described a ritualized cataloging protocol that recorded not success, but the conditions of failure. The time of day, atmospheric humidity, experimenter fatigue, and even the brand of candles used. The folio recorded how errors propagated through networks. A flawed diagram copied into a student's margin, a misread sigil passed to a novice, a failed enchantment recycled into a ledger as instruction. The investigator felt the pressure of its logic. Failure was not accidental here. It was a transmissible condition the archive contained. The archive answered again with a low, architectural rumble. The investigator felt the floor underfoot vibrate. "We closed one of these 2 nights past," he said, voice small against the stone. "You sealed it then." "Why is it waking now?" The archivist's fingers hovered above a page that held a small circular sigil, its lines erased and redrawn in haste. Because someone else read it and carried the mark. The folio's memory reacts to readers. It will either bind that mark into itself forever, or it will spill the mark outward when published. The tags decide which. A new event interrupted the exchange. A distant metallic clang like a chain striking a shelf. A lamp guttered. The archive moved with a slow, deliberate pressure as if testing the room's boundaries. The investigator looked up. "The folio remembers differently," he said, repeating the archivist's earlier line, but now as question and accusation. "Who read it? Who else has the mark?" The archivist's brows drew together. He pointed to the investigator as satchel. "You were present when the plaque clicked into place 2 nights ago," he said. "You watched me. You did not speak. You carry the mark now. You always wanted to catalogue the reasons errors endured, but desire is not enough. The archive chooses custodians." He slid a blank bronze tag onto the ring and let it hang between them. Argument rose into a sharper exchange. The investigator leaned forward, voice quickening. "Master Archivist, I have been cataloging marginalia for years. I have notes. I will publish the protocols and the conditions. People need to know how these errors spread." The archivist's face barely moved. "Investigator," the archivist interrupted, "if you publish, you set those marks loose. They will not remain diagrams on a page. You will not only carry them, you will seed them. We do not contain failures to hoard knowledge. We contain them because they become weapons when misapplied. Who are you to decide that?" The investigator, "You slide blank tags to decide what stays hidden." His voice sharpened as some long-held grievance pushed through. He remembered the bronze plaque being sealed and feeling barred from access. The archivist's reply came softer. "And who are you to decide the world reads it without warning?" He tapped the folio's edge. "You pried a seal once. You know what happens." 3 rapid lines followed, back and forth, to force the decision into the open. "You sealed the volume," said the investigator. "You moved it now." "Tell me why." "I moved it to bind a new mark," said the archivist. "Leave it sealed and the mark stays in the archive. If you bind it, you take a man's burden without his consent," said the investigator. The conversation stalled as the folio breathed a thin sigh when the archivist shifted his weight. The marginal ink seemed to rearrange beneath their gaze. The investigator touched the page, despite the archivist's warning. The ink nibbled at his fingertips like a static pull. For a moment the room filled with a precise memory. A failed attempt to blend an oil with a powdered mineral, someone saying a measurement aloud, 3 scruples, not 5, and then the retort shattering. The sound cut the air like a small, focused whip. The investigator involuntarily flinched. That was the mini cliffhanger. They both held their breath. The archive answered with a low, steady vibration that seemed to press in through the soles of their boots. The words bind and release settled in the room like 2 copper coins on a lectern. The archivist closed the folio partway. "There are 3 options," he said. He looked at the investigator. "We bind the mark back into the folio and place a plaque. We excise the page and destroy it, or we publish, and the mark leaves this vault forever. You must choose." The investigator felt a new layer of calculation. Urgency, then consideration. He had come to expose suppressed errors. Now the choice would determine whether suppressed errors remained suppressed or became active again. He set his satchel down and laid his field notebook on the stone. He opened it to notes he had been keeping for months. Dates, marginal notations, the names of those who had copied diagrams incorrectly. He had intended to show patterns, to prove that the archive hoarded mistakes rather than learning from them. "You will bind this into your collection and call it closed," he said. "You will keep it like the folio you placed 2 nights ago." He touched the fresh ink smear near his collarbone. "Or we publish, and you will be responsible for the fallout." He forced his voice steady. The archivist's gaze moved to the satchel, to the compass, to the investigator's spectacles. "Investigator," he said, "you have the trace. The folio marks a reader and grows more coherent. The archive can hold that coherence if we accept the mark into our racks. But once released, a failed protocol spreads along teaching lines faster than corrections. Students will copy the crossed diagrams into new volumes. Workshops will replicate the conditions. You know this, dread threaded into the room, not atmospheric, but physical." The archivist's knuckles went white on the folio's edge. The investigator's jaw clenched. The brass compass warmed under his palm. He answered, "If we bind it, who binds the binder? If we keep these things trapped, the same mistakes will recur elsewhere for lack of correction. The archive can become an endless conservatory of danger." They argued in short lines. "We are not hoarders," said the archivist. "We are custodians. Custodians decide alone." The investigator replied, "You have kept a ledger of failures that could have helped technicians avoid the same disasters. Why keep them sealed?" He looked at the archivist's calloused, ink-stained fingertips. The archivist tilted his head, because unbound knowledge is contagion. Because not all minds can hold it without carrying its consequence, the archive answered with a slow shift. A stairway slid forward 1 step, as if inhaling. Small lamps flickered in alcoves. That mechanical motion felt like pressure to choose. The investigator swallowed and forced his next words to be precise. "Then let us bind the folio in a way that forces accountability," he said. "We will insert a ledger note with the conditions for safe study and a record of the reader's consent. If we bind it, we will also require the archive to publish a corrected protocol under strict supervision when we are certain it cannot leak a mark. We will not leave it sealed in silence." The archivist watched him. His fingers hesitated on the bronze tag as if testing its appetite. "You would impose a safeguard that forces the archive to acknowledge its role?" He asked. "You would accept the mark as a burden and also force a trace forward?" The investigator nodded once. "Yes. I will accept if you accept that we annotate the folio with corrective steps, and that any controlled publication must include a mandatory grafting procedure so readers do not carry the mark. If you refuse, then I will take the folio to a public registry and publish the diagrams with my own annotations. I will not let this be locked away again." He pressed his palm flat on the folio and felt the scrape of vellum. The archivist's next action resolved the argument. He slid the blank bronze tag into the folio's cradle, then hesitated and lifted it again. "I will not let you take this into public hands without a binding. But I will not let the archive become a secret court that binds people forever without recourse." He set the tag back down and then, deliberately, slid it beneath the ribbon and pressed it into place. The bronze clicked and a faint arc of light ran along the folio's spine. A small, decisive event followed. The folio accepted the tag. The ink on the page chain fused to the fold, and a thin ribbon of smoke uncurled from the gutter, not freeing the mark but drawing it inward as if into a slow, mechanical mouth. The investigator felt a tug at his sleeve where the fresh smear had been. The mark paused, then retreated into the folio's pages. The archive's rumble deepened into a satisfied creak of shelves rearranging. The master archivist sagged back against the lectern and let out a breath he had been holding. "You will be recorded as a reader." The archivist, voice softer. "You will carry the ledger of this decision in your hand." The investigator set his name in the folio with a trembling pen the archivist provided. He wrote the date and a short note. Conditions for constrained study, and a promise to initiate a grafting protocol when safe. He did it with measured letters. When he finished, the folio's edge sealed like raw vellum banded with brass. The archive answered with a single, low toll, metallic, like a distant bell. Immediate consequence followed. A single page slipped from the folio and fluttered onto the lectern. On it, a diagram had unstitched along its margin, revealing an annotation in a different hand. Bind with consent. Graft protocol required. The master archivist read it aloud. Slow, this is the compromise, he said. He sank into the lectern's carved arm and closed his eyes briefly, as if the weight of the act had pressed upon his ribs. Above them, one of the bronze catalogue plaques along a corridor shifted and clicked open. A new empty plaque glowed faintly where a title had been burned away, exactly as the master archivist had done previously 2 nights ago. The investigator's satchel felt heavier. He touched the ink smear and found it paler, as if pulled into the folio with the page. They did not celebrate. The room held a different quiet. Not satisfaction, but the raw certainty of a choice made and carried. The archivist spoke with the dry, raspy voice he always used when something important was set into motion. You will be listed as an official reader and author of the grafting note, he said. You will not publish unconstrained. If you break that trust, the archive will seal your name into a memorial ledger. He did not threaten loudly. The sentence itself carried consequence. The investigator placed his spectacles back on and said, I will not break the trust. I will force the archive's hand on public correction. His manner steadied. He reached for his field notebook and removed pages that listed contacts and planned lectures. We will run the grafting trials in this chamber under supervision. We will test the corrective method step by step. I will document and publish the results only when safe. His voice was compact and actionable. The archivist nodded once, then write your procedure now in the folio so the archive records it, he said. He produced a small bone tolly stick and handed it across the lectern. If you fail to perform the graft, the tolly will be struck and the folio will be resealed. He placed the tolly beside the investigator's pen like a small judge's gavel. They worked through late-night measurements and dry protocol language. The investigator wrote concise steps. Step 1, isolate the marked symbol. Step 2, prepare a neutralizing salve with specified binders. Step 3, execute a grafting bind performed by no fewer than 2 qualified archivists assisted by an external witness. Each instruction read like a manual and not a sermon. Each line forced the archive to institutionalize a move from secrecy toward controlled transparency. Once the final line was set, the master archivist performed a slow ritual of sealing. He pressed the bronze tag into a recessed plaque and watched the folio's spine fuse. The archive answered by rearranging a shelf so that a new slot opened for the folio. The building's bones moved with precise, mechanical sound. The investigator did not see it as metaphor. He saw the plaque slide and a small brass hammer strike a ledger note. In the aftermath, as the first pale wash of dawn slid into the high windows, they walked the corridor together. The master archivist's shoulders stooped in the way he always did. His shawl hung with the same antique brass embroidery. The investigator carried the heavier satchel and adjusted his spectacles more often. The archive's alcoves glowed faintly with phosphorescent amber. A single bronze plaque held a new burn mark where a title had once been. The investigator put his palm over it and felt the heat of the metal pulse once. They exchanged few words. The investigator placed the folio in the new slot and the master archivist pressed the chair's arm like a man who had finished a long job. You will oversee the grafting trials, the archivist. We will bring in external witnesses as you demanded. If your method succeeds, we will publish with those safeguards. If it fails, we reseal and reconsider. The investigator answered with a small, precise mouth movement that could be read as agreement. He ran a thumb along the compass in his satchel and felt the faint imprint where the ink had been. I will supervise, he said, and I will take a copy of the protocol to the registry under supervised custody. The master archivist looked at him and allowed a slow, dry laugh. Take only a copy. Investigator. Not the original. Not yet. He handed the investigator a bronze tag stamped with the folio's catalogue number. This will record you as the reader and the custodian of this decision. The investigator fitted the tag onto his satchel strap. He felt the weight of it settle like an appointed duty. At the far end of the corridor, the archive shifted a shelf once more and closed an upper alcove with the sound of old wood setting into place. The lamps dimmed as morning found the stone. A final concrete event closed the chapter. The investigator paused at a plaque shelf and saw a small burned area where a title had once been. Ash drifted down in a precise curl and landed on the stone. He brushed it off with a careful finger and then folded his jacket over the spot as if to cover the scar. He did not speak. The master archivist watched him and then walked away, his steps measured. The archive's hum receded into its habitual cadence. When the investigator reached the stair, he stopped and looked back once. He touched the folio's catalogue tag on his strap and felt the ink smear as a pale memory at his collar. He stepped into daylight carrying the heavier satchel and the obligation of a recorded act. The bronze tag clicked faintly against the leather as he left. The archive rearranged a shelf behind him, and the plaque with the fresh burn mark sat empty, a small final witness to the decision made within the vault. The chapter concluded with a concrete beat. A plaque burned blank, a man bearing a new record on a bronze tag, and a promise written into a folio bound again. There was no grand pronouncement. There was only the folio sealed, the grafting procedure written, and two men carrying the cost of their choice into separate days. The archive settled back into its slow watch and the lamps cooled. The investigator walked away with ink on his cuff and a predetermined schedule for testing. Not with triumphant relief, but with the steady burden of a task made and a ledger to keep.